digital product and data consulting firm. And then I've had the privilege of doing this thing called Startup Grind for the last 7 years. It'll be 8 years pretty soon, but I'm passing the torch to a new member of our team, Lucas. He's going to take over Startup Grind moving forward. So this is actually a fun one in that, T, you are the first repeat person that I've had on twice in the almost 8 years. And this will probably be the last one that I do. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's been super fun, and I'm melancholy in one way to not do it anymore. But Lucas and I were talking earlier, and it's probably time to pass the torch and have somebody else lead these conversations because people are tired of my shtick and my questions, and so Lucas will bring some good new energy to it.
For the record, those are your words, not mine.
That's true. That's true. Lucas didn't, he tacitly agreed. Let me put it that way. So for those that don't know, this is Tanisha Robinson. Tanisha and I have known each other for a long time as probably, you probably know lots of people in and around the Columbus startup ecosystem.
Yep. Hustling.
Because you've done a couple things over time. And that's mostly what we're gonna talk about is being a serial entrepreneur and what the hell is wrong with you, right? So this will be part interview, part therapy session probably.
In.
So do you just get bored easily, and do you just want to go tackle a new problem, and is that what's at the root of all of this, company starting business?
I don't think so. I think for me, I am not necessarily an ideal employee. I swear a lot. I'm super willful. I'm super opinionated, and I, over the years, have reflected on the attributes of what I want in my work experience, which is that I want to visibly move the needle. I want to work on stuff that's interesting to me and that I'm passionate about, and and certainly I've had tons of jobs where I just had to feed myself. But then, over time it's become kind of seeing these slivers of opportunity, in most cases, iterating on something that already exists in a way that I think it could be done better. And so it's not really out of boredom. Sometimes it's out of frustration. Frustration meets opportunity, I would say, is kind of the center of all the things that I've ended up doing. I think, and I think we're going to talk about this in a bit, but now when it's time to go is a separate discussion. But I think when it's time to start, it's something that's usually very, very interesting. And I think the most important piece is it's like a thing I can't put down. Like it's unequivocally that I have to do it. And now doing this several times and knowing how brutal and awful it is, it's something that requires, I think, a lot of intense focus because it requires a lot of sacrifice in terms of the opportunity cost of all the other things you could do with your career and your time, never mind time with your family and friends and leisure activities. So.
Yeah. Have you, along that line, how do you know that it's time to move on from something? And is it more sort of guttural than it is, anything, tangible, I guess. And have you always known what the next thing was, or did that matter less than knowing you didn't want to be continuing to do the current thing enough to keep doing it, irrespective of whether you had decided what the next company and thing was?
I think there's a couple of cases, like with Fuda. So that was a daily deal site focused on locally owned independent restaurants. That was kind of my first startup. And with that, we gave a $1 to the food bank for every certificate we sold. And that was basically an iteration of Groupon, but without the tanning and teeth whitening. The barrier to entry, though, became very low when there was a WordPress theme was coming out where people could launch their own daily deal site. And so even though I had great relationships and partnerships in the local restaurant community, I saw I saw some fatigue from my partners because they were getting pitched by anyone with kind of the tech at that point, and felt like it was time for me to find something else to do. So I was contemplating shutting it down, but then 614 Media was interested because they had kind of spun their version up only a few months before. So I was able to effectively sell my list, and they merged that with their company, but I was able to, have a decent little exit on that. So that one was just, it was the industry was starting to implode and it was time to go. So with Print Syndicate, and for me, the playbook was determined, and there's kind of this, well, they call it founder syndrome for a reason, right? Where the founder gets bored and then they become toxic because they meddle with a perfectly good business model. And Print Syndicate is now will be 8 years old in a couple of months. But the business model, once we figured it out, was decided, and it's still working and doing really, really, really well. But then it's a focus on operations and profitability, which is certainly something that I'm capable of, but that's not that interesting to me when there's not a lot of creativity involved in terms of moving the business forward. Other than potentially on the marketing side, but not in terms of the model. And so, in that case, I realized that, I can contribute better as an advisor, but, the path through the woods is pretty clear. And I like being on the edge of the woods with my machete and not knowing where the monsters are and just kind of forging through. And so when the path through the woods is paved and well lit and safe, I find I'm less interested.
So there is something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. I didn't say there's nothing wrong with me.
It's and this is and we'll talk a little bit about the new venture Wonder. But you talked about sort of creativity and marketing, and one of the things that I will have to say is Wonder's identity and brand and the visual representation of that, the packaging, etc., is all really solid.
Thank you.
How much of that is out of your head and is your creative work, and how much of it did you engage others for around Wonder?
So I worked with a brilliant local graphic designer, Jenny Bamey. She's a one-person graphic design shop, CCAD grad, and she's brilliant. And I had worked with her in the past on much smaller projects. But with Wonder, I had a very clear feel, but like my creativity does not come visually. So I knew how I wanted it to feel, and that most packaging is overwrought, overdone, and very, very busy. And so, I wanted something that's actually beautiful, which you don't see in packaging very often, and that had sort of an approachable vintage type of feel. So if you look at the typography, especially in the logo, that's represented. So, Jenny and I put together a lot of mood boards, and we're able to kind of arrive at the logo. So she was really brilliant at kind of visually interpreting what I was trying to articulate with the brand. And I'm just super happy with how it's turned out, because I think it's great, and it's very reflective of kind of what I had hoped to build. So
Yeah, no, it's I really dig it. I think it's really good. And I think that startups, I think, because there's so many things to focus on, and we could spend an hour just talking about, well, we could probably spend a week talking about all the things that a startup has to focus on that are all seemingly as important as everything else, right, at any given moment. But the brand for the company and the company's product always seems to take a back seat. It's never initially given as much sort of credence as it probably should. Do you think that is just because it gets overshadowed by lots more sort of pressing, intense things like being able to eat and being able to pay people and that sort of stuff? Or do you think founders by and large aren't great at brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of founders are product people, and they are great at building out tech, and they are great at building out products. It's like, even if it's like a baker who's brilliant at making cupcakes, they maybe aren't great at building a brand and a story that connects with people. And I mean, it has to be both. So, with Wonder, if the liquid wasn't any good, how beautiful the brand is doesn't get us to have repeat customers. So I think it has to be both. But I think a lot of founders don't focus on the storytelling and the brand and the narrative and the brand being a visual narrative that is the reason why consumers want to pay any attention in the first place. And I think a lot of first-time entrepreneurs also don't necessarily think about the customer first. So I think people kind of often get mired in the product and their vision without getting feedback from customers the whole way through. And, you know, so I had, and even in product development, I had, you know, friends and investors and neighbors, this is pre-COVID, come over to my house and we would just taste through stuff. And also, you know, and then there's a point where you have to have conviction. So some people are like, I don't like the cannabis leaf in the logo. And I'm like, well, I don't want to shy away from what's in the product. And, you know, and so I think, you know, and so everybody's got an opinion and you have to kind of figure out what the boundaries are on what inputs you want to accept and which inputs are, you know, important to you as the visionary. And, you know, so there is a balance there. But I do think it's important to understand, like, is there a market for this? And, you know, are consumers interested in like what it is just by looking at it? Because that's why people pick it up off a shelf.
Right. Yeah. There has to be some level, especially for a consumer product like Wonder, right? There has to be some, you know, not to, you know, get too weird, but there has to be some level of physical attraction, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Between the human and the product, right? Because
and versus the competitors on the shelf. And, you know, and even if it's not a direct to consumer approach, you know, something that's a clear narrative and supported by a visual narrative is important, even in B2B. You know, because I think a lot of people get mired in nerding out on the product and the tech and the whatever, instead of, you know, kind of clearly articulating what is the value and the promise of the thing, whatever that is.
Right. You said something interesting that I've never thought of before, which is that if you're a first-time founder, you actually can be more ego-driven than a multi-time, a repeat founder, because I think your ego is driving you, right? As a first-time founder, it's a very egocentric, ego-driven thing to think that you can start a company that's going to solve a problem in a way that customers care about and value. When you're a repeat founder and you've gone to the well a couple times, you know how little it actually is about you, and how, right, and how much it is about customers, and how much it is about partners and distribution, right, and all those kinds of things. Do you think that you are less ego-driven now than you were earlier in your career and in the earlier companies?
Yeah, I would say that I am. I think, I mean, you could ask people that know me, but I do think, you know, when you build a thing and your customers tell you want something that, you know, and I get surprised by my customers even within Wonder, but I'm far more receptive to it. And I think, you know, Print Syndicate was a powerful lesson for me, because we let our designers kind of create content and go for it. And there, you know, I would say even now 98% of the content on the site is stuff that I don't understand. But we were really speaking to our customers. And, you know, sometimes your customers are not the demographics that you put in your business plan. Now, personally, I've never written a business plan, but, you know, I think sometimes who shows up as your customer is very different than what you imagine. And then how the business, if you choose to adapt and iterate, how you adapt and iterate the business is very reliant on the people that give you money. And I think, you know, some people's conviction about their product results in the failure of the business, versus saying, okay, these are our customers and this is what they want from us. And so, you know, I think I'm much more customer first focused, and really thinking about the customer experience all the way through in terms of the brand. Like we're in the midst of a website redesign that's going to launch in a couple weeks, which I feel like will kind of make the visual and digital version of the brand much more consistent with the on the shelf version. But, you know, all of our point of sale, the stuff that we put, you know, to market in stores versus online, and all of that is going to be kind of much tighter as a package. But you know, I think people don't think about that every single touch point with a brand is a connection with a customer, potential customer, and that all of those things are related.
Did you ever think, and did you know that you would do multiple companies? Or when you were like doing Fuda or Print Syndicate, or, you know, I think you were involved in Ticket Fire, right?
Yeah.
In some way.
I was the co-founder of Ticket Fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
still an advisor. Yeah.
So did you think that it was going to end up being this sort of portfolio, and you were gonna take this many at bats, or has this all been just sort of a natural evolution of, okay, that thing's done, I'm going to go on to the next thing, that thing's done, I'm going to go on to the next thing? How sort of opportunistic versus strategic has all of it been?
It's not strategic at all. I can't say that I've like had this linear vision in my mind that I was going to be a serial entrepreneur, but I think with Fuda, after Fuda, I you know, took a break and reflected on like, what did I want to do? Like, would I go get a job? And actually, when I left Fuda, I joined someone else's startup as the head of marketing, and then ultimately left that to build Print Syndicate. So I have had a couple of jobs that were very, you know, startup related, but maybe I wasn't necessarily the founder, because I think I like the fray and the chaos of early stage, and the opportunity to really visibly move the needle is something that no matter what I do in my work, I want to do. I mean, even at Brewdog, I didn't think I would be running a division of a multinational corporation, but they built a brewery and they're like, you know what, we need an entrepreneur to lift this thing off the ground. And so in spite of the infrastructure, I got to, you know, kind of run a startup in the beer space, but with a lot more support and a great international brand. So, you know, I think for me, it's about moving the needle. And, you know, again, to those attributes of like, I want to work with people I like, I want to do stuff I believe, I want to visibly move the needle, and I want to learn stuff and be creative. And I think any opportunity that fulfills those attributes will work. I don't necessarily have to be the founder, but I think over the years I've honed, you know, a good ability to kind of see opportunities, see gaps in spaces that are interesting to me. And I have enough confidence now that I know I can build something pretty awesome.
Well, I'm looking at your picture, and I'm looking at my picture in the Zoom, and you haven't changed at all in the last 10 years. And I'm 53 and I look like I'm 83. So I don't know what's going on with that. But
well, Ryan, there's a saying, and it is black don't crack.
Well, and white apparently just turns whiter, because that's what's happening to me. So just as I looked at my picture, I was like,
and actually, and just for every all the not black people on this, it's totally a compliment to say black don't crack. It's not racist. You're allowed to say that. It's okay.
Thank you for the social justice. Because you know us white people, you know, we walk on eggshells. You know, what's funny and what's inappropriate. And that's a very fine line.
Yeah. So I just want to, you know, make that one easy for you. It's a compliment.
Yeah, appreciate that. How much of Wonder? Well, maybe we should tell people what Wonder is.
Yeah.
And then I'll ask the question I was going to ask. So, what is Wonder? What are you doing? What's your intention behind it? Give us the Wonder pitch.
Yeah. So Wonder is a naturally flavored sparkling beverage infused with vitamins, adaptogens, and CBD. We are focused on plant-based performance. And in the broader scope, we're really a cannabis beverage company. I think that beverage is one of the most accessible delivery mechanisms. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the space of plant-based performance. And a lot of the cannabis industry is really not focused on the cannabis curious consumer. And that's really the market we're going after.
What's the founding story in that? Had you been thinking about doing something with CBD for a long time, and then beverage became sort of the vehicle, or did you want to do something in beverage and then CBD became sort of the secret ingredient?
So actually, I got promoted at Brewdog to Chief Disruption Officer, And the funniest part about that though is that my mother called me when I told her, and she said, "You've been disruptive your entire life. I'm glad that you're getting paid to do that." So
That's awesome.
yeah, it's really good. But basically, so White Claw and hard seltzers really have made a huge dent in the beer industry. So you see kind of the rise of hard seltzers, and beer is declining as part of that. And so one of my big projects was, what is the next thing in beverage? Like, what is going to be the next international or national trend in the U.S. That takes down craft beer and or the beer industry or hard seltzers or whatever? And so, in kind of spending some time really working on that problem, I unequivocally believe that cannabis beverages are going to be bigger than craft beer and in a more compressed time frame. So Wonder currently is in the CBD space because from a regulatory standpoint, a capital deployment standpoint, it's much more efficient and easier to launch in CBD, though we intend to get ourselves into the cannabis beverage, the marijuana beverage space as well. But really with low dose beverages, because in going to a lot of dispensaries, a lot of marijuana products, THC products, are extremely potent. And so, a lot of folks have had very negative experiences with THC because they are consuming way too much for a beginner. And so I think there's a lot more cannabis curious people. I think that's where the real market is. And then, CBD, especially when infused with vitamins, can really help people. I think the opiate and heroin epidemic has really scared a lot of people. And so they're wary of consuming medication, even from their doctor. And I think a lot of people are turning towards holistic and plant-based wellness. And, so I think we have an opportunity to build a product that both on a wellness and a recreation side are really something special.
How much did you leverage out of your experience and exposure at BrewDog to the operation of a craft brewery into Wonder, just from a fundamental operational perspective?
Yeah, I mean, selling cases is not so different. The beer industry is actually very, very restrictive. A lot of the rules to sell any kind of alcohol in each state is driven by kind of prohibition era laws. And so, I had to get up to speed in terms of the kind of how to navigate in the non-alcoholic space from the industry. But, the playbook is pretty much the same in terms of getting distribution, how to market products in a store, and and figuring out kind of the right placements, and then certainly understanding the core of velocity and sell through, and thankfully in Wonder, our margins are much bigger than craft beer.
That's never a bad thing. As you think about where the company goes, you alluded to it a little bit, of having even potentially different ingredients, right, and moving beyond CBD in beverages. Is Wonder, do you think today Wonder will always be sort of an alternative beverage company, or do you think Wonder as a brand can support other products that would even, go outside of beverage?
I think we're going to stick with beverage. I think that's its own supply chain and its own challenges. And until we've dominated the beverage space, which there's plenty of work to do, I think it's a distraction to try to spin up snacks and granolas, because it's a whole new supply chain issue. And so it creates a lot of new work and resources, when I think it's easier to be singularly devoted to, can we be the dominant cannabis beverage brand in the Midwest? Because most of our competitors are on the West Coast, and there's a handful on the East Coast. And I think we have an opportunity to really win in the Midwest. And so that's kind of the plan in the near term. But yeah, I think kind of spinning up anything else is a distraction from trying to, because like we're still very tiny, and until we might like one day, but it's not really on my mind. It probably won't be for several years.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like in the beverage space, that there's like a breakout product and a breakout company like once every 5 years. Maybe it's even more like once every 10 years, right? I mean, Red Bull was that,
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago. I mean, they seem pretty old at this point. But energy drinks and Red Bull was a whole new category. And then you mentioned the Trulies of the world and the
Or
White Claw.
Fever Tree is another really good example where they went high-end cocktail mixers. Fever Tree and Hella Cocktail Company, where they've gone high-end mixers and stuff. And so there's definitely a lot of new stuff out there for sure.
Do you think that why do you think that is in beverage? Is it because it's dominated by some multinational conglomerates that are just massive, that if you're not interesting enough, and if you're not consumer desirable enough, that you'll just get squashed in the process, right? Unless you've got something that is so unique and consumers want it, that consumers will forego, and they'll ignore the multinational conglomerate products to say, no, I really like this hard seltzer stuff. I don't even care. Because at the beginning, White Claw was not easy to get, right?
Yeah.
And seemingly it went from not easy to get to now you can't get away from it, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it seems
mountains in the grocery store.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah,
it seems like that is almost like catching lightning in a bottle in the beverage space.
Yeah.
That it happens very infrequently that one catches fire like that. What do you think are some of the attributes that allow the ones that have caught fire to have done it?
I think that, in some cases, right, some people would argue that White Claw is the new Zima. So, I think there's a sense of timing is the center of the universe for any startup. So never mind in beverage, I think, some things come too early and some things come too late. And I think timing is really, really, really important. So Fever Tree, the high-end cocktail mixers company, the stars aligned with the rise of mixologists in New York and in big cities. And so, now in a lot of bars, there's a mixologist, and you see Manhattans on cocktail menus, which wasn't necessarily common, even 15 years ago. So that was this, so for Fever Tree, they sort of caught on to that they had the right timing where, for a long time, craft cocktails were very, very high end, very obscure bars. And then they went very mainstream. And so I think, timing is a big piece of that. I think, craft beer was very dominant for a long time. But IPAs are heavy, they're high cal. And I think that hard seltzer is around this like kind of wellness idea of like lower ABV and only 100 calories. So you can crush 12 White Claws on a boat and not feel bad about yourself. But if you take down even a 6-pack of CBC Bodhi, you're gonna, you won't even be able to, get home. So I think
you won't get off the boat, right?
You won't get off. Yeah,
right.
So I think, it's just really around kind of this consumer sentiment of wellness or better for you that's really driven, because, even wine or liquor has a lot of calories. And I think people, so with the rise of keto and all of these diet fads that are really focused on low carb, the low carb beers are terrible. And so even though I don't prefer the flavors of most hard seltzers, there's a couple good ones out there. I think, that rise of low carb. So it was this timing though, because for a long time as Americans, we've been like, fuck it on carbs. I'll just give them to me. So, so I think there's just these, when the winds shift with consumers and your product happens to be there at the right time, and you have the infrastructure and the capital and the team to push, I think that's when it goes.
How can, because I think timing is critical for any startup in any sector with any kind of product. And Steve Blank has actually done some analysis might be an overstatement. He's dug into it a little bit, and he's made a pretty bold statement. And this was a couple of years ago that, and if I think I remember correctly, he sort of assessed that it was a factor in 42% of startups of whether they would succeed or not was the timing right.
Yeah.
How can somebody go about assessing whether the timing is right, and then how do they be honest with themselves if the timing isn't right, to then to admit to it and step back and say, you know what, we either are too early or we're too late and this isn't a good time?
I mean, sometimes it's not obvious. And so I think the best way to kind of even get a feel of where the wins are is to get product onto a shelf or pushed out into the world as quickly as possible and with as little cost as possible. And then if you feel like you've gotten it mostly right, you can iterate to sort of change with the wind. Because I think it's not just, even if you had the perfect product and the perfect timing, the ball is rolling and things are in motion. So there's still, it's still really important, I think, to iterate and to pay attention to your customers and continue to iterate. I think there are, epic companies that were, Eastman Kodak, back in the day, they had perfect timing. They were massive, and then they failed to iterate over time. And so I think, by pushing something out there and then paying attention to what your customers say, you'll learn a lot on if you need to adjust. But sometimes it is obvious. I mean, I worked on a video group chat startup, and then Google launched Hangouts. And so it was just like, we were about a month away from launching, and it was like, okay, you know what, probably there are companies obviously with far more capital and capability to launch this sort of thing. And so we were still early in the space, but like kind of too late for the size that we were. So it was just kind of three of us working on it. So we just decided to shut it down. And so, I think it's, again, like not only having the right time and the right product, but then the infrastructure and capital to push if the stars align, and then iterating on top of it all the time.
And if they don't, as you discovered with the video chat, right, you have to be willing, because you see this all the time, right, where founders just sort of ignore the signs and
just grind, yeah.
And they just grind and they just beat their head into a wall, right? And when you even talk to them about the fact that, okay, well, Google's come out with something similar, or Amazon has come out with something similar, or pick another well-funded big resourced company, and then the founder will say, well, we can beat Google, right? And it's one of those things where you've because Google obviously had to beat some others to get where they were.
Yeah.
It's a very conflicting state, right? When someone says, well, are you saying that we shouldn't compete with them because don't they exist because they chose to move forward and compete with others that were here before them? And that feels like a very sort of conflicting, contradictory state of, you're not going to beat them, so you might as well shut it down. But if you say that to everybody, then nothing new happens, right?
Well, I think it's a question of like, do you try to go head to head with Google? Probably not. Especially but I would say that a lot of the big tech companies are afraid of, a couple people in a garage that are thinking big ideas. But I think it's, where are the problems in what Google's built? Where are the frustrations in what Facebook has done? What are the limitations of those very, very big companies? And can you exploit or fix or iterate on some of those limitations in a way that is more agile and better than what they have done? And that is where, or come up with some shit they've never seen before. Like, I think that there's kind of two people, I think, often conflate innovation with invention. So you can invent something, and that's much, much harder to do these days, but it's certainly possible. And then innovation means that you're taking something that exists and tweaking it a little bit to make it better. So like Fuda is exactly that. We basically took the Groupon model, said, I don't get tanning and teeth whitening. But you can have multiple loyalties to the independent restaurants. Let's do that. Or even, at BrewDog, I I built a business model. So we have the Doghouse Hotel in Canal Winchester, and the question is, how do we scale the hotel? And the reality is, hotels are really, really hard businesses. 5% profit. You have 24/7 operations, and it's a really hard gig. But basically, I said, oh, you know what? We have 100 brew pubs all over the world. Most of them have residential upstairs. We could kind of smash up the Airbnb model with but a professionalized version. So we have a branded Airbnb effectively. So we call them dog kennels, and that's something that's highly scalable and capital efficient. So I didn't invent, Airbnb or people renting out apartments, but these are branded apartments so that, that is an innovation, not an invention. And I think there are a lot of problems that people have with Google and with Facebook and with, a lot of these huge corporate apps, that sometimes you can pick off a sliver and fix it or improve it. And that's often the companies that get acquired. And a lot of times that work is not sexy, but it alleviates the frustration of their millions of users.
What across the spectrum of things that you've been a part of, what do you think that you've learned the most, and what have you sort of taken from each of them that now, if you had to tell to your pre-Fuda self, right, would be the sort of words of wisdom that you would share based upon what you've learned through all these different endeavors?
I would say the most important thing is being really thoughtful about your partners. And that's in every sense of the word. I think a lot of times people get very enthusiastic at a startup weekend and they form an LLC with people they don't know. And it is harder to break up with a business partner than it is to get divorced from a marriage. Like, it's really, really hard. And I think people don't necessarily invest in a little bit of legal or a little bit of, a little bit of legal on the front end to really create clarity around contributions over time. And so, because it's like, yeah, well, you and I, we'll go 50-50. We met up startup weekend. Let's build a thing. And then, one person ditches, but they own half your company. And so that can often, kind of kill the startup in its crib before it even has a chance to get off the ground. So I think, having, getting some advice on a thoughtful structure, but so not just on the partners in terms of your founders or co-founders or founding team. I think also being thoughtful about who your investors and stakeholders are. I would say I will never, ever have an investor again who doesn't understand my business, and is not aligned with my values. I think, sometimes you might feel like the capital is important, but I think having partners and stakeholders in every sense of the word that totally get it. So like, over the years, I've had investors like, well, we could be more profitable if you pay your people less. And I deeply believe in paying people living wages and offering high quality benefits, because I feel like community impact starts with how you treat your people and their people. And so I will not take money from someone who doesn't agree with that as a thesis and a way to function and do business. So I think, really thinking about who your partners are, making sure that you have agreement on the long-term game for the business. Because some people are like, I want to run this company forever and pass it on to my grandchildren. And some people are like, I want to sell this one day. And, more often than not, neither of those things happen. But I think that's, I see so many people get sideways on not having a little bit of legal advice on the front end. Because you can do vesting schedules for founders. If you don't know your founders, where it's like, okay, so we both start, and over the next 5 years, we're going to vest up to 50-50. But then, so there's a lot of ways to ask somebody. And I know that Rev One and a lot of the, offers like legal counsel. And there's a lot of attorneys and stuff around that are willing to at least help you think about it. But probably like a legal Zoom operating agreement is going to kill your startup.
Right. So you're either an incredibly fast learner, or you enjoy really digging into and diving into new things and new areas, because some of the companies that you've been a part of starting, have. Some are tangential and have, references back to other things, but some of them are just, flat out net new, things that you've never attempted before. Is that just sort of part of your nature, that you can dive into something and you can learn it really fast, or is that a skill that is developed and sort of nurtured over time?
I think both. I mean, I have been an avid reader my whole life. Well, since I could read, obviously. But I think a powerful attribute of the best entrepreneurs I know are they're super curious people, super, super curious, and they read a ton. So, so far, I read about an hour. I read a book for about an hour a day, but reading a book for an hour a day gets me through about a book a week, and I've had that habit for a really long time. And so it's not that I necessarily learn more, or learn faster, but it's just that I learn a lot. And I think that in reading history and about leadership and all kinds of things, it's really gives context to human behavior, human decision making, my own decision making, and what drives people. And then just I think reading builds empathy, because you just get to kind of experience other people's perspective. But I do think that at the core of a business, they're like the way that they all function is pretty straightforward. Like, you have to have a thing that people want to give you money for, and you have to be able to give them that thing for more money than it costs you to make it. And so the basics of business itself are the same in any business. And so I think having a really good understanding of finance is important. It's something over the years that I spent a good amount of time learning and reading about, and got a mentor who was a public company CFO, so that I could at a glance look at the numbers and see the whole story of the business. And I think that's really, really powerful. I think a lot of founders are not as focused on the numbers, but that is the center of the universe for the business, beyond timing, beyond luck, beyond anything else. Because even if people give you money for your product and you can't make a profit, then you don't have a business. And so, it's like, so that there's like a kind of really basic element there of that core function. And so, and I think for me, it's again about like curiosity and my view is like, if I can build a thing and it's mostly right, and sometimes mostly right means like it's 51% right.
Right.
And then iterate from there. I think that's really the key, is just like to just keep going. And then I think, and really, if you listen to your customers, they will probably tell you. And if you listen to your frontline team members, they will also tell you. And I think a lot of people kind of don't ask.
Yeah.
But that's a curiosity question again,
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of content, and there's a lot of media out there now around startups, being a founder, being an entrepreneur. I saw something a few days ago where this guy who's got a pretty successful company said, direction matters more than speed. And so there are all these, especially on the social platforms, right? There's all these quotes and quips, right? That taken out of context makes somebody seem really smart, right? That direction matters more than speed. And then 30 minutes later on another social platform, you could probably find one that says speed matters more than anything else, including direction.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do you think about, as someone who's thinking about, who's stewing on a problem and they're thinking about taking a run at it, how do they sort of deal with all of this input of information and noise that at the end of the day really has no relevance on whether their company is going to be successful or not, or whether they're going to be a good founder or not?
Yeah, I mean, you can put this up as a quip. Empathy matters more than anything. So if you are empathy and curiosity, really, but if you are talking to your customers, if you're listening to your customers, if you're listening to your team, you're paying attention and are resilient and capable enough to adapt, I think that you have to get through. I mean, it's like everything is like a slog in the fucking mud. I mean, when I talk to people that are like, yeah, we're just going to build this thing and then in 2 years we're going to sell it. I can't. I know you can't like leave a coffee after 5 minutes, but
right. But the conversation is over at that point.
Yeah, it's over for me. Yeah, I gotta tune out. But I think that that really it's about your brand or your company's relationship with your customers, whoever those customers are. And so it is a very human relationship. Like for the most part, this is not, we're not doing business with robots, we're doing business with human beings. And so it's a very, very, and I would say that the vast majority of these clips are by straight white dudes who wouldn't dare say that empathy is the most important thing in your business. Right. So, but I think that, that's really kind of putting yourself in the shoes of your customer and thinking like, okay, are we doing this the right way? And being very customer focused, and some of the brands that people most admire are heavily focused on the customer experience, Apple and some of the most valuable brands in the world are heavily focused on the customer. I mean, Amazon, even though people think they're evil, it has created immense efficiency for their customers. And, and so you can talk about the supply chain and the challenges of that, but they have added like massive convenience for hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah.
And
as customers, we could help them with their supply chain problems by not ordering as much, right?
Sure. Sure.
So if you don't like some of their supply chain problems, then you also don't customer. It's interesting, and I totally agree with you, by the way, about being customer centric. Why is it so hard for us to be customer centric? Because it seems like this drum gets beat, over time, and that's really what the lean startup is about, right? And so Eric wrote about it in the book and goes around and has done training and workshops on it. But we keep having to beat the drum about being customer centric because we don't really want to be customer centric, right?
No, I think it comes back to the ego piece of like, well, customers don't know what they want. And, I often say you have a real business when somebody you don't know gives you money for your product and you can make money on it.
Yeah.
And your customers are the people that show up. It's not who you maybe imagine shows up. And so you have to pay attention and service those customers. I mean, it's like this very core piece. I think people are resistant because it's like, well, customers want this because I did a survey of 1,000 people or 100 people. And so this is what customers want. And then, but you put your shit in the wild and they will tell you if you listen. So I think, and I think the other thing is people take way too long to launch. So they speculate and test and try and work and test and then launch. But they've invested a year and a fuck ton of money. And so then it becomes painful to iterate the business after all that work. Because it's like, remember when we, spent 100 hours a week working on this shit that nobody cares about and nobody wants. So I think that's kind of really drives the argument for a minimum viable product of like, put some stuff out there, see what people say, what they do with it, and then iterate from there. And, and that can be very clarifying because I think people get mired in speculation and research.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think MVP has also become very bastardized because if you ask 20 people what it is that presumably should know, they'll all give you a different answer, right?
Yeah.
Because it literally means that the thing that you can get out there that proves your core hypothesis, right? That if customers don't value that, right, that you're solving that problem in that way, then you don't have anything else. But I've seen MVPs now that are like version 10 of a product, right? And and then I've seen things that are so rudimentary that it's like, okay, that's not really an MVP, because an MVP to me means it's the first version of the product that a customer can use.
That can
Right?
use, yes, exactly. But I think people try to kind of overbuild them sometimes, when it's like, okay, so like, what is your hypothesis here, or your thesis on this product, and what is the basic level experiment to prove that?
Right.
And even with Ticketfire, we mocked up the app. We had a buddy, like we took turns, everybody did shifts on converting the first tickets. And so we hadn't figured out the technology at the time of OCR and reading the tickets, but so it's just like, and so a little bit of a little bit of Mechanical Turk, and a little bit of the team, that me and the founder and his buddy, and the co-founder and his buddy, who were just converting the tickets. We didn't have a ton of volume, so it wasn't important at the time, but it was enough to prove the use case, and that there was real value in converting a paper ticket to a digital one. And so then once we proved the use case, it was like, okay, this is the right path. And then because we could prove the use case, we could talk to brokers in the secondary market, we could talk to StubHub, and then that became more interesting, and it helped us iterate future versions. And so, it doesn't have to be fully built, fully baked. If you know that you have the capability to build it out eventually, it's like, just if it has to be a manual version where on the back end you're converting it yourself, or doing the work, or use the gig economy or whatever these days to do that. It doesn't, but I think people get, they want it to be really sweet tech, but nobody's buying the code, they're buying the function.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. People are too worried about, can they make that back end process work in code, versus knowing that that's not really the core problem that they're trying to solve, right? With
Right.
the first version.
It's a consumer facing side. So as a consumer, if it's seamless, they don't care.
Right. Two things I want to ask you about that I think are challenges that a lot of entrepreneurs face. And one of them is, what's the value of an accelerator, right? I don't think any of your companies have been as part of an accelerator, right?
No.
Do you like accelerators, not like them, believe they have a place and they serve a good purpose, or do you not see a lot of value?
I think they can. I think, in a lot of cases, they have a very kind of specific thesis generally in terms of the types of businesses and teams that they will bring in. But I do think that the networking opportunity to pitch in front of a lot of major investors, if you make it through the accelerator process, is very powerful. It is grueling, painful, and difficult to get meetings with investors. And so if nothing else, accelerators help kind of refine the business case, help refine some of the fundamentals in terms of the finance and legal components. So Y Combinator and Techstars have done a really good job of kind of actually putting some structure out there, even for other types of early stage startups. Like the SAFE investment came out of people going through these accelerator programs and realizing that convertible notes sucked, and doing straight equity deals was also too challenging from a valuation standpoint. So I think that there's a lot of value because they bring a lot of resources that the startups don't necessarily have to pay for, other than that, like the sliver of equity up front, or a safe note. I think, though, the access to investors, however you can arrive at investors, is the really powerful piece of any accelerator.
Well, that's a good segue to the second question, which is, because I think this is a true statement. I don't think I've ever met a founder that wasn't in fundraising mode all the time, because it's that challenging in most cases.
Yeah.
What's your fundraising investment advice to people these days?
I think that I often talk to founders that are thinking about raising capital and have not clarified the very basic premise that if an investor gives you money, they want to understand how they're going to get that money back plus more. And so, people have these, vast pitches and all kinds of stuff, but they don't talk about a path to the business is going to do this and create value in this way, that means you're ultimately going to get your money back plus
Right.
more. So that's why investors give money. And so understanding the basic intent of investors helps you kind of refine your pitch and narrative with that in mind. Now, saying, well, we're going to run this for 2 years and sell it for $1 billion is like not realistic either. So I think, the other thing is, in terms of raising capital, the easiest way to raise capital is to build a valuable business. If you have a business that has revenue, even if it's not wildly profitable, even if it's not profitable, but you are on a growth trajectory, you can certainly get investors to pay attention. I think it's a lot harder if you don't have customers, if you don't have revenue, and this idea of, well, once we have 100 million users, we will be we'll be bigger than Amazon doesn't make any sense, because I think that it's a very math-based conversation, and so understanding, like, how much does it cost you to get those users, and how long is it going to take? So having, I think, a very realistic view is very helpful. I mean, I have a good amount of inbound investor conversations, thankfully, and they said, "Are you raising?" And I said, "Well, not really. We're trying to close out our safe, but not going for a Series A right now." And they're like, "Well, why not?" And I'm like, "Well, it's been very weird times. We've had about 60 days of normal performance, and it's been challenging to build a thesis on what is the future, what does the next 12 to 18 months look like in the business." And so if somebody handed me $5 million right now, I don't know how I could deploy that effectively in the current environment. I'm starting to build an opinion about that, and have a point of view, but it's not something that, because I talk to folks that are like, "Yeah, I'm going to go out and raise 5 million." I'm like, "Well, for what?" And they don't know, because the other question is, okay, if you give me this pile of money, how am I going to make that? How am I going to turn that into growth for the business? And how am I going to turn that into value? So that if I can say with Wonder, or will be able to over time, and meaning in 12 to 18 months, if you gave me 5 million based on this playbook that we've been running for the past year and a half, I will deploy it in this way specifically, and it will arrive, and it will build us to, exponential growth or double or triple or whatever. And so I think, people don't have enough clarity on what they're going to do with the capital, and how that capital converts to growth / increased value of the company. And so that's what what investors want to see.
Why do you think? Because every founder should know that that's the case, right? That they're going to get some amount of investment from an investor who's expecting a return. That's the only reason for them to make the investment.
Yeah.
So, but why do you think it's so hard for founders to connect the dots on that, and to connect the dots on the math to say, if you give me $1 million, here's what's going to happen, and here's when you're going to get a return, and here's how much we're projecting that to be, and here's why? Founders seem to just want to sort of stick their head in the sand and ignore the math of connecting the funding to return dots. And
I wouldn't say funding to return. I would say funding to growth and business value growth, which ultimately results in return. But it's really like, if I have this capital, I can get more growth than if I didn't have. I can accelerate growth. I can have more growth than if I didn't have this capital. And then the conclusion of that is that there's a return. I think that a lot of founders go in thinking that they have the next $1 billion idea, and it's just a matter of time before some buyer comes along. And so they're not necessarily worried about that slog in the mud to the exit. And that it's going to be probably a 5 to 10 to beyond kind of journey to potentially be acquired if you make it that far. And so, I think a lot of founders have their eye on the prize and not on the basic fundamentals of why an investor wants to give them money, and then how to deploy that capital in a meaningful way. But I think a lot of founders are not paying enough attention to the use of capital, And because it's like use of capital, people, tech, furniture,
Right.
breakfast,
Right.
right? And happy hour. And instead of saying like use of capital, we'll take this 5 million, we're going to deploy it in these sorts of ways. Cause I think a lot of people miss in a strategic plan, like this is where we are now. This is where we want to be in 2, 3, or 5 years. So I always build out like a 2-year plan, a 3-year point of view, and a 5-year speculation, because I don't think you can actually plan a high growth startup at 5 years.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's like, so what is true now and what needs to be true in the span of these years in order to hit this 5-year speculation? And capital is certainly a component of what needs to be true along the way, but there's also the people, the resources, and the partnerships or whatever. So I think giving a clear roadmap on that 2-year plan, 3-year point of view, 5-year speculation is really helpful, because they can see how you're going to take that capital and then get there.
Right.
And I think a lot of people don't talk about how they're going to get there. It's just like, well, you give us this money, we're going to then by some fucking magic, have 10x, 20x, 100x, 1000x users. And with, because it's like, even if it was just on user acquisition costs, it's like, well, costs us $10 to acquire a user. So if you give us $10 million, we'll have 1 million users. I mean, even that, I don't even see that kind of clarity in a lot of decks and things. It's just like, oh, we just need people in tech and
Right.
happy hour. Yeah.
Right. No, right. There's a huge TAM, right? And then the TAM sort of is meant to wow, people.
Yeah.
There's no justification and there's no substance. And I think, that founders often don't see themselves or don't evolve quick enough into being good operators, right? And the plan that you spoke of and the use of capital is a demonstration of you're making the shift from being this idea person and this entrepreneur, right, to being a good operator. Many founders don't ever make that sort of mental transition from, all right, we're doing this. I've now got to go from being this founder, whatever that means, to now being an operator, right?
Well, but I think that's this chasm, right? Is people think being founder is a visionary. Like I recall talking to one founder that said he was having a Steve Jobs moment. I couldn't even, but walking around barefoot. So I think people like there's this kind of hustle porn of well, I'm a founder, I'm a visionary, but like it's not that glamorous. Again,
No, it totally sucks, actually.
Yeah, it's not that glamorous, and you have to operate your business like so I know my COGS per SKU by the penny, and I know exactly what my gross margin is, and because the success or failure of most businesses is actually in like pennies and nickels and dimes. It is not in the millions. It's in these little corners of your P&L where it's like, how in the fuck did we spend $1,000 on office supplies? This is not a wonder story. We don't do that. But it's like one of my previous companies where it's like, why are we buying, like, let's go down to Huntington and let's go get some pens. And they'll give us as many as we want. But I think that operating the business is actually what being an entrepreneur is. A lot of people have a lot of ideas, but turning that idea into a real business is hard, and then turning that real business into a growing business is brutal. Turning into a high growth business is brutally painful and awful, and it's actually possible to grow too fast, and that hurts in a totally different way than if you just fail. And then sustaining growth over time is also its own version of a slog. So you go from slogging in mud to slogging in mud and shit, and then there's also monsters that might come up out of the mud and shit and drown you. So people shouldn't become entrepreneurs is the moral of the story here.
Right, exactly. No, I was hoping you were going to lead up to that, because that's what I know advise people. I'm like, why would you ever want to do this?
I mean, if you were even remotely employable, get off the call, get off the podcast, just turn it off.
Right, because for most people shouldn't be entrepreneurs. Most things are not going to work. It's irrational. If you think that you can overcome that and it's still something that you need to do because you are unemployable, right? Then you probably don't have a choice. But for most people, they do have a choice, and they probably shouldn't do it. So maybe we will have depressed anybody who's watching now or who will watch this in the future. But I think that's the reality of it.
Well, I think, I talk to a lot of would-be entrepreneurs, and it's like, well, my boss is an asshole, and so I want to build my own company. And I'm like, look, that's not a good reason. Though certainly your direct manager has a huge impact on your work experience. But like, if you start your own company, that does not mean that your life is devoid of assholes. And in fact, you're probably the asshole now. You just can't win. And so I think
Well,
Lucas
is not laughing and smiling because he's agreeing with your comment that he works for an asshole.
No, I was thinking of myself as the asshole.
As the asshole.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's, it's really hard to build a business. And then there's all these external forces that even if you have worked really hard and you had capital and you have customers and it's going pretty well, it still might not work. And so I think when you have a thing in front of you that you cannot put down, knowing how brutal and painful it's going to be, that you have to do it, is probably when you're maybe taking the right first step to build a thing. And that you're sacrificing and struggling, and then even then it still might not work, and then, like a fucking pandemic shows up and just completely sideswipes whatever progress you made in your business. I mean, there are a lot of great entrepreneurs that have built very successful businesses that are just being completely decimated by COVID right now, and that may never come back. Now, I think those entrepreneurs will take another crack at it, but certainly there's just shit you can't prepare for.
Yeah, totally. I did have somebody a couple of weeks ago say to me that he deserved to be successful, that his company deserved to succeed. And I said to him, I said, I think you want to amend that to, at some point say we earned the right to be successful. And he was like, no, we've worked really hard. We've invested a lot of time in this. And I'm like, dude, no one gives a shit, right? No one cares how hard you've worked, how much time you've put into it, right? You don't deserve anything. None of us deserves anything. And
I say, as much as I say about my ego, it's never been quite that.
Yeah. And so, I'll be surprised if this guy, right, has any amount of success, because he's just grounded in a falsehood that he's just going to have to live through it and experience it and realize that he was wrong. Right. And then maybe he can take another crack at it once he realizes that he was just approaching it from a completely erroneous perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I think though, there's a good amount of people with that kind of attitude about life. I mean, I was reading an article the other day that there was like 12.5% of dudes said they could score a point against Serena Williams in tennis.
Oh, please.
So then I said to myself, may God grant me the confidence of a mediocre dude that thinks he can score a point on Serena Williams, because I don't have that kind of ego, but I wish I did sometimes, because holy fuck, because I can do anything and I deserve all this. So that's not surprising, but I think the game sort of shakes that out. Unfortunately though, the game is not necessarily fair as we think about the like levels of capital deployed to women or Black people or people of color versus to straight white dudes. And and I think that in the midst of the George Floyd murder and Black Lives Matter, we are seeing some positive momentum, but there is still a huge chasm in terms of capital being deployed to other entrepreneurs besides straight white dudes with that kind of confidence sometimes. And like, I think that it's been disproportionately deployed, especially to early stage companies, when there are a lot of really, really great companies with great leaders, whether they're diverse or not, that could use growth capital, but that that can go from being a great 10 or $20 million business to being a great 200 or $500 million business, but it's not those home runs in terms of the venture capital thesis. So I think though there's some soul searching happening now in the VC space in particular that hopefully shake some things up in terms of overall equity for founders that are certainly capable but haven't ever had a chance.
Yeah, for sure. And my greatest concern now is that we don't regress, right? Because I think it will be easy, I think, over the course of time for it to regress and for us to just end up back where we were, pre George Floyd and pre-protests and pre-social justice, right? And so I think that if we're not intentional about making sure that those voices get heard, consistently moving forward, I think we could end up back where we're just looking at a bunch of rich white dudes, back in control and not really caring about being that diverse with, who they're funding and who they're not.
I don't think that they are trying to give their money to women or Black people, because or their power, right? And so, or their privilege. And so I think, that's, but thankfully there are slowly more voices and there's slowly more diversity on some of these boards and at the table. I mean, the funniest part to me is that diverse boards or companies with diverse boards with more women and people of color are more successful on the street than companies with boards of all straight white dudes. And so, even the data supports diversity being this really great thing for business and for publicly traded companies. So it's just a challenge of, can we continue to instigate and hopefully see some substantive change? Because it's hard enough to raise capital no matter who you are as a founder and as an entrepreneur. And then it's really fucking hard if you're a woman and even harder if you're a Black person. And the data says that. So, it's a slog anyway. But it is, I think, my view is to not be thwarted and to just build great stuff that then people have to get over that I swear. And I think I'm right all the time. And I'm super opinionated and because I build something that they think is valuable regardless of, how they feel about my personality.
Right. Well, great to see you. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
Absolutely.
Amongst everything else that's going on, and enjoy the Airstream and life on the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks everyone for showing up. Good to see you there, Alex Brown. And Ryan, I'm glad to be your exit interview. And what are you doing next?
I'm just trying to work as little as possible now. So
I want to be you one day.
So yes, I do a lot of hiking, kayaking, and biking these days, and I just want to do more of that.
Awesome.
So,
I'll see you on the road.
All right, sounds good. See you, T.
Cool. Thanks, guys.